Hello, I'm Ian Scales, you're watching Telecom TV, and I'm joined today by Phil Cracknell. Phil is a cybersecurity specialist and interim CISO, and we're going to be talking about security. Phil, welcome.
Hi, thanks Ian.
In your address, you talked about the role of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, and some of the challenges he or she faces. And the big problem appears to be that in the area there's a lack of agreed KPIs and metrics against which performance can be judged. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So the lack of KPIs, I think, comes from the fact that previous reporting has been based around technology and so specific products. And as a result, all the outputs from these products differs wildly.
Yeah, so essentially measuring the wrong thing.
Yeah. We're measuring operational performance and not the success of security measures.
Yes, but it must be a difficult thing because the only time that you know that it's not successful is when something awful happens. Give us an idea about how you would go about fixing that problem.
Well, I think the problem has been historically that security managers and security leadership have reported what they have available to them, what they can, and not what they should. So I would start by going to the business and understanding what it is they need to be aware of, things that they might want to take action against or upon. Certainly ensuring that what we report in some way supports their business objectives. So if they're making headways into new business areas that are going to create new risk for them, we need some indicators of those risks to be reported so that they can see their progress.
Now, is there a role for industry-wide benchmarking here so that you can tell one set of performances against an average set of performances in the industry?
Absolutely. They give you a good example. CFOs can talk, regardless of the company that they come from, in common values and units of measurement, PE value, EBITDA. Doesn't matter whether the business itself is a small one or a large one. Whereas security professionals don't have that luxury. We don't have a standard. And any standards that are, or in the past have attempted to surface, have been either consultancy or analyst-led, and ultimately couldn't necessarily be considered independent.
Right, gotcha. So one of the other things that you raised is this problem, and it's a perennial problem in IT, is how you get technical people to talk to the board properly, basically. How do you get that feedback loop going effectively? Talk a little bit about that. It must be doubly difficult in the security area.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I think we're all familiar with the phrase, speaking the language of the board. The problem that our security managers have got fundamentally is they don't have the words to speak the language. The metrics will give them those words. And ultimately we're looking at words that are meaningful to a board, to a non-exec director, to a CFO. So our exposure is X. And I think that the wider context is not just reporting current points in time, but indicating our exposure is X. But last month it was Y. And so the board can see a trajectory and a direction, and they can question that. Why is it going up? Why is it going down? Should it be going down? What are others doing? Are other businesses going down at the same time? And that gives them the context. So everything has to have this common sense backdrop to it.
And might those measures be things like attempted, DDoS attacks and so on? What sort of measures would you have to show that a risk was, going down rather than going up?
It's a good question. So the kind of thing that we would show would be the number of servers that were yet to be patched, all of which could bring about a data breach or some kind of a cyber attack, and how long those servers take to be patched. So that's a reflection on the business's agility and their culture, as well as their exposure. And using those values, it makes sense that a CISO then has the capability to say to the board, we are not patching things quickly enough, and that's because I don't have a big enough team. And I've raised this several times, and if you want to see the direction of that particular metric go positive, I need the extra people so I can patch things quickly, or that risk is sat waiting to be exploited much longer than it should be.
Do those people always come under the direct control of the CISO though? It might be another guy sitting on the board that's responsible for patching.
Well, typically yes. This is the age-old problem of the conflict when security reports to IT, which in most cases and many businesses it's still the case. So by security being a department within IT, if you like, it is conflicted. Security will raise the flag that things need patching. The CIO will look at this in a wider context and effectively say, well, I have other changes to make. Your security priority isn't a priority for my operational business as usual activities.
So it's a question of directing responsibility for where it should be as well, isn't it? So in the nicest possible way.
I think responsibility and accountability are key to this. And I think separating that partnership of the security team and the technology team is also a bit of a catalyst to enable that. So we're not saying remove security from IT entirely, because then it would fail to get traction when it needed to patch things. The responsibility to deliver those fixes to protect your business need to stay with the CIO. But the accountability for that stays with the security leader, who hopefully reports in to another channel on the board. And then we have that balance.
Right. And that's what you would recommend, would you, to the rest of...
In most businesses that works. It depends if they're a heavily technology focused business. Sometimes the security function being part of technology is essential. Other times it's flawed from the outset and conflicts occur.
It's almost like the security officers are 2 stages down from the board. So you first of all got to get the IT people to understand what you're talking about, and then they've got to get the board to understand what they're talking about.
It is a problem being accurately represented. If you don't attend a board meeting yourself, then you're passing it as another item for the CIO to relay to the board.
To stitch you up.
And it's, well, not necessarily to stitch you up, but ultimately it's not going to get the priority. It's 1 out of 5 items on his list to raise with the board. And if they're not taking security seriously enough to have the horse's mouth viewpoint, then I think they need to rethink.
Yeah. I mean, it must be awful in these organisations that suddenly have the most terrible breach. You know, you can imagine everybody diving for cover, can't you?
Well, that depends whether they're mandated to report it or not. So one of the other problems with metrics and the need for metrics is we've had years of cover-ups. That's been our job, to not let this get out into the public as a head of security. And of course, regulation and legislation is now turning that on its head, and suddenly everyone's in panic because it's a cultural mindset change. Suddenly we have to be open and disclose we've been breached, whereas in the past it was shareholder value we were protecting, so we didn't want our business to suffer from a reputational hit.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. So in a sense, the regulatory changes that are leading to that disclosure is an opportunity for the industry to get its house in order.
I think so. We've had over the years a number of events, Sarbanes-Oxley and the Enron scandal, changes in the Data Protection Act, all the breaches that we've seen over the last few years now. And what we're starting to see is this pattern of, after the storm, reform. We had the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to handle a particular weakness. We've now got GDPR next May, which is looking at flaws in the way we manage personal data. I think as an industry, we should look to get what's right in place before we're regulated. So we have more control of our own destiny then.
Get ahead of the flow.
Absolutely.
Phil, that's been a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.